Thanks everyone for joining me on this panel, and thanks everyone for staying to listen in. So we're going to be discussing a bit more abstract topics, but same time very interesting, I feel like. We're going to be talking like the end goal for different ARB initiatives, and by ARB initiatives I mean things that are happening in the DAO, from grants programs all the way to very specific initiatives like ventures, or even the proposals that are happening right here. And I want to kick off this discussion firstly with a very quick introduction of who we're talking with, like 30 minutes introduction of who you guys are and how you're involved in like DAO. So I'll kick it off.
Hey everyone, I'm Frisson. My day job is I work at Tally, which is a governance platform that Arbitrum uses. So I spend a lot of time helping folks with governance. And then outside of that, I'm just a very active contributor to the DAO as a delegate and a signer on the MSS and contributor in various areas. So love Arbitrum, super stoked to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt. I'm from StableLab. We're a governance advisory firm. So we've been delegates in the Arbitrum ecosystem since the inception of the DAO, and then I've been running all the incentives programs in Arbitrum, so STIP, LTIP, the back fund, and STIP-B.
I'm Matt Feeback. I'm one of the co-founders of Entropy Advisors. We're working exclusively with Arbitrum DAO to basically help create systems and initiatives that are valuable to the DAO. Before starting Entropy, I led governance and consulting at Blockworks Research, where we were also like a day one delegate, and additionally sit on the Arbitrum Security Council.
Hi, I'm Griff, and let me just say it's an honor to be on this panel with you guys. You guys are like hardcore contributors in Arbitrum. I feel like I'm the one. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. Like, these are the heroes that they really make the DAO run. I'm just kind of a delegate who hangs out and tries to skim forum posts and vote once in a while, you know, or as often as I can. And I founded Giveth and a million other projects in the public goods space. That's kind of my main focus.
All right, perfect. Thank you for that. So I want to kick off the discussion with basically trying to understand what your guys' thoughts are and take are on what is the end goal of the different initiatives that we're doing. Not individually, like the different like end goal for this grant program or this initiative, but in general, like how they all tie into the DAO vision.
I can start us off here. I think today there is no overarching vision for Arbitrum DAO, unfortunately, but it's actually something actively being worked on and that we're actively working on. So I think a good way to describe this is today we have a lot of siloed initiatives with really talented builders, but what ends up happening is one person is building, you know, wheels on a car, and the next person is building an airplane, you know, an airplane head, you know, at the end of the day, it just doesn't all fit together. So I think that what really needs to happen is the DAO needs to build this like strategic vision that kind of brings things together so that all these talented people can kind of, you know, mesh.
Sure. I can speak to how I think about, you know, the long-term vision for the DAO as a delegate. You know, for me, it's about helping Arbitrum reach its maximum potential from a technology perspective. So how can we lead the way as a, you know, execution layer for crypto, and then you know, and sort of get that technology into the hands of as many people as possible. There's kind of two parts to that. You know, one is growth and development. So how can we safely, you know, ship improvements to Arbitrum, like time boost and bold that Patty was talking about this morning? How can we fund ecosystem, you know, development via grants that were just being discussed, via incentives? And then the other piece is just like long-term sustainability. So really the DAO is charged with a lot of responsibility in Arbitrum. You know, the DAO is responsible for making sure that any changes to Arbitrum are safe, that the treasury is around for the long term. And so, you know, the other piece is less about growth and more about just like safety and sustainability and making sure that we're kind of stewarding the Arbitrum stack in a way that is you know, secure and credibly neutral.
Yeah, I want to double down on Frisson's point there that we need to really focus on how do we keep the DAO sustainable so that we can, you know, I feel like there's a huge opportunity to be kind of an impact investor of sorts, right? Where you have the DAO supporting projects that can then give back to the DAO itself and bring in people to use the infrastructure. The DAO is the steward of the Arbitrum infrastructure that's being created, and should be the biggest promoter of it too. But it doesn't mean we have to do it directly. It's really more. I really also loved what Disruption Joe was saying in the last panel, making these analogies to public services that governments run. And I feel like it's the DAO's responsibility and opportunity to support groups that are providing public goods to make Arbitrum better than it is now, and constantly be striving to make it better. But we have to also be considering our own revenue and our own sustainability. And that's the end game, is how do we make Arbitrum DAO sustainable while also supporting projects that are making the infrastructure stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece. I think it's an exciting time in the DAO because it took us so long to figure out how to do anything. Like, it took us months to figure out how to start a grants or an incentives program, but now people are getting more comfortable passing proposals, like thinking about how do we grow the treasury, not just take money from it all the time. And I think that helps shape the goals of the DAO. Now that we feel more comfortable, we can actually execute on stuff. We can think about, okay, what do we want to do? And how do we keep the Arbitrum DAO sustainable and alive for a long time?
I think just to play devil's advocate, so first of all, I fully agree with you guys. Like, that is definitely the goal here. Like, we need to create something that can support itself and support its builders and support its users and support the builders that are building the tech stack that is Arbitrum itself. But that said, so far, most of the initiatives we've seen actually executed in Arbitrum DAO, at least from my perspective, haven't actually, really gone to do that. So, like, it's really amazing that we can all sit here and have the same vision, but how do we actually make that happen at an execution level when it comes to proposals that are being created?
Yeah, I think that's almost out of laziness or miscoordination or the challenges of coordination, where it's like, okay, well, liquidity mining, let's do it. It's simple, right? It's not sustainable. It doesn't do, but it's simple and it's clean and it adds value, and so we do it. And thank God Matt's able to run all of that. So, but in the end, there are a lot of projects in the works that I'm really excited about that are really focused on the ventures, and I think it's like. All of us saying the same thing of like, hey, how do we make the DAO sustainable? It's trickling in, right? And it's still in the works. But I do think there's a huge momentum in the DAO towards that direction.
So one thing on the topic of sustainability is thinking about the ARB token. I would say if you look at the proposals that have been passed in the DAO to date, they're largely spending the ARB token, which I think is appropriate, right? Like, in some ways, Arbitrum is at a growth stage. It makes sense for us to invest the treasury in growth. But there hasn't been much, if any, thing done by the DAO or developed by the DAO that's actually focused on adding utility to the ARB token or adding value to the ARB token. And this is something that I think is really important because at the end of the day, there's another conversation to be had about treasury diversification, but there's no future where the treasury doesn't have a lot of ARB in it, and sort of like having a path to having that asset be a sustainable thing in and of itself is actually a really important piece from my perspective.
One simple way, I think, that we, for some reason, I haven't seen a single proposal that does this, is just give some of the ARB that's vested, right? Like, if you're going to pay people or you're going to reward people, sure, they need some liquidity. But, like, if you get everyone who's getting proposals passed to have, like, a shared stake in the ARB token, they'll also be allies in the effort towards bringing value to the ARB token, and I think it's just totally underutilized.
I think we can all agree to an extent that the role of the DAO is to be the steward of the ecosystem, right, and drive like the ecosystem growth. But I think for everyone, growth means a different thing, and depending on who you ask, it could be increasing the usage of the protocol, driving more users. It could be increasing the treasury and just making more money. And that has to do with like the overarching vision, which is difficult, in my opinion, to create when you have a bunch of stakeholders that have different and opposing views. And that is kind of like my follow-up question on that. There's like, in most companies, like traditional Web 2 companies, you see like top-down vision creation where you have like, I don't know, Steve Jobs of Apple and they create the vision for the company. How can we do something similar in the DAO? Is it top-down and we need to hire like, elect an entity that shapes the vision, or is it bottom-up? And I know Matt has a take on that. So why do you go first, but I want to hear everyone's opinion.
This might be a contentious metaphor, but to me, it almost feels like an oil-rich country, like a Dubai or a Saudi Arabia, where you have a royal family, which would be like the top 15 delegates who have the ability to make a lot of changes in the DAO. And of course, they're going to have different, they're going to have different incentives, they're going to have different ideas, but at the end of the day, like they all want to make this thing succeed. And then when it comes to like what does success look like, that's where the problem really comes in, because we can all say sustainability, but a lot of people want to focus on driving more, users or driving more adoption of the Orbit tech stack. So success does actually have a lot of different angles here. But that said, I think if the, top 15 delegates were able to come together on a strategic vision, that would actually enable the DAO to work towards something. So in 5 years, Arbitrum DAO wants to be a sustainable entity that has diversified revenue streams, that has DAO-owned businesses, which is like a unique thing Arbitrum DAO is working on, and a really diverse and sophisticated delegate base. Like if we can set that vision for 5 years from today, then we at least have a goal that we can all work towards in unison. But yeah, so that's something Entropy's working on quite significantly. Like we're going out there, we're trying to speak to delegates and at least bring together as many points of view as possible. So we're doing our best.
I think I want to hear Griff's take, because I know he's more of a bottom-up person.
In general, I am a bottom-up person, but I'll be honest, I feel like the meme of DAOs has died in my heart and soul. The original meme of DAOs when we were doing the DAO back in 2016, it was like, we can have a leaderless swarm of people that are just like coordinating effortlessly, with different shelling points, and the leaders can emerge and things will just work out, right? That has not been the case these last 8 years. So we have to recognize that, and I actually think Arbitrum is doing a good job at finding the balance. The DAO itself shouldn't, I don't know that the DAO itself needs to be the leader, because it's a coordinated group of individuals that are not really well organized to be leaders. But I do think the opportunity of Arbitrum DAO to cultivate leadership within. We just passed this $200 million proposal to bring the gaming ecosystem to Arbitrum. Picking that vertical, investing in that vertical, finding people to be leaders within that vertical is critical for us. It shouldn't be the DAO, but making sure that we're in a place to cultivate leadership, I think that's the way. So yes, bottom up, but an emergent leadership, but leaders, like real leaders, focal points that we invest in.
I think one really important perspective that needs to be taken into account when we think about vision for the DAO is, the folks who have done a lot of the building of Arbitrum, which is Off-Chain Labs. Arbitrum DAO is really interesting because it's in a lot of crypto protocols, there's sort of like a, pseudo handoff of control from the original labs entity to the DAO. But in Arbitrum, there's nothing pseudo about it. Like they fully gave control over, they being Off-Chain Labs, of everything to the DAO. All the TVL on Arbitrum, all of the Arbitrum chains, the treasury, the foundation board. There's more than that. Like I could keep going. In actuality, right, the DAO itself is an independent entity that doesn't need to look to Off-Chain Labs to decide what to do. But a lot of the culture and the spirit and the original sort of like intent of the Arbitrum technology and everything about the way that it's built, comes from that original founding team. And so I think, I would look to things like the community values that were outlined in the constitution of the DAO, and just like I think even just from like a brand identity perspective as well in Arbitrum, like I think these are things that the DAO, I think it's incumbent upon us as a DAO to do a good job of kind of aligning with the original values and identity that were developed over time for Arbitrum.
Matt, do you have anything
to actually add to that? Like, I do think it's very, undervalued and not looked at nearly enough that Arbitrum DAO is the first time a general execution environment has ever had actual decentralized governance with governance contracts in full control. So token holders not only control the treasury, but they also control who's running the sequencer, what the fraud proofs actually look like, and everything else about the protocol, complete control to the Arbitrum token holders. But one thing I would add, though, is maybe we don't, over time, maybe we don't even want to rely on off-chain labs. Don't get me wrong, like they are some of the best builders in crypto, if not maybe the best development team. But maybe over time, the DAO probably wants to get to a place where it has multiple different development teams that are all integral to, actually none of them integral to like Arbitrum's success. So that way, like we have kind of like this Hydra model where no matter if you cut off one head, we will always just come back. But to your point about the bottoms-up structure, I'm curious how you've seen really high-quality talent attracted to be leaders in DAOs in the past, because I think that would be amazing for Arbitrum DAO to be able to execute on.
Let me think about it.
All right, so one thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking of the DAO, and it's different from like traditional structure that we see out there, is I don't know who here has seen that art installation of the robot that leaks oil and it works constantly to pull it back up. I feel like Arbitrum and most DAOs are kind of like this robot, but in the opposite way. So they come together to decentralize more. And we have this constant dance of people coming together, try to implement different checks and balances to decentralize more. And sure, decentralization is kind of like a thing to go for, but in the current state of things, it makes it way more difficult to organize, coordinate, and push things forward that would eventually help decentralize on a higher level. How do we balance that short term to drive different initiatives? And I know it's like difficult topic or contentious sometimes, so happy to throw it your way.
I think going back to what both of them said in the last answer, it's kind of you need to decide as a DAO what your direction is, but then give the power to a few specific people, but enough people that if one of them goes away, it's fine. So if you decide as a DAO, okay, we want to have grants, which we've decided, now there's a ton of grants programs, a ton of good leaders running these different grants programs. If one of us went away, there's many people there to step up and take over. So it's started from like the bottom up where the DAO decided we need grants programs. It condenses a little bit into a few people are running these different grants programs so you can move fast, but then there's enough people there where if one goes away, the DAO doesn't fall apart, you can continue building.
It's actually a very funny question because this is exactly what we were thinking about when we named our company Entropy. It was kind of the idea that you need to balance out the amount of chaos and the amount of organization, because if you create too much centralization, like we see in some DAOs, like Optimism, for example, that kind of has one point that's leading all initiatives that the DAO is taking on, which is their foundation, it actually allows for an efficient structure, but it's really hard to imagine how that's ever going to have the level of innovation, contribution, and passion that the Arbitrum DAO has. So because of that, like Arbitrum has very unique advantages that I don't think Optimism will likely ever see. But at the same time, we could probably take move a little bit in their direction where we're a little bit more centralized. I think MakerDAO is the best example of this, who started completely decentralized and is moving towards a place of what's debatably almost too much centralization in the form of the founder kind of running the show these days. But I do think that that's a lesson they learned, that they didn't have the organizational infrastructure to run the protocol in a fully decentralized way. So they kind of like moved it back towards the middle or more towards centralized, and over time they'll probably move it back. And I think Arbitrum DAO is heading in the same direction, but in an even more efficient and effective manner.
I think the DAO as a whole should be focused on identifying major opportunities of areas of focus and investment, right? Maybe it's verticals, gaming DeFi. Maybe it's technical decentralization, bold time boost. Maybe it's treasury diversification and thinking about how we're, allocating our assets and driving sustainability. So what are those areas of focus? Maybe it's 5 themes, something along those lines. And then identifying, like Matt said, the right leaders for each theme. It's probably not one. It's probably a smaller group, 3 to 5 individuals or teams on each key theme that are, have been a lot. The DAO has sort of like voted and blessed those people to lead, and then driving accountability of those teams. So when we fund something like the GCP, or we fund the next latest and greatest incentive program that Matt cooks up, how can we design that from the beginning with reporting and accountability and alignment to like the original mandate that was put out in the proposal in mind from the beginning, and develop cadences around that. So, the DAO is sort of delegating the ability to execute over this area to a smaller group, but we have the really strong accountability mechanisms in place to learn and improve over time.
Yeah, and accountability is a yin and a yang, right? Like, accountability is so critical because it gives you almost like a target. It's something you're going for, and it pushes. If you have accountability, it'll keep you on the right path. But you also need support to stay on that path, right? So it's kind of like the carrot and the stick. It's like you have to be accountable. Here's your goals. Here's your metrics. Achieve those things and prove that you achieve them, and then. But if you're having troubles, also here's support. And I think this goes to what you were asking before, like how do you attract good leaders? I mean, it's easy to attract good leaders if you have a lot of money, which Arbitrum has done, but how do you keep them, is the real challenge. And how do you avoid, I feel like one thing that, because I'm relatively active in both Optimism and Arbitrum, I get to see the comparison a lot. And there's things that Arbitrum does really well, way better than Optimism, like what you pointed out, that there isn't this focal point. Off-chain Labs hasn't come in with like such strong overbearing, like an overbearing mother saying you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way, whereas Optimism absolutely is way too overbearing, in my opinion. But then, and that's one of the benefits for Arbitrum is that I don't know if anyone here has worked with plants very much, but like if you want a plant to bush out, you just take off the top, you top it. So like you cut the top of a tree, and then it'll start to grow up lots of smaller branches, and it's kind of the same in DAOs. If MakerDAO, Rune went away for a long time and wasn't very active. He came back, became the tip, and now it becomes very centralized. And in Optimism, it's the foundation, and it becomes very centralized, and everyone just kind of is like, what do you want us to do, Foundation? In Arbitrum, it's like, Off-Chain Labs, what do you want us to do? Foundation, what do you want us to do? And they're like, figure it out. And that breeds leadership. That breeds a lot of leadership, but we just have to figure out the support structures. Just because there's all this opportunity for leaders to emerge doesn't mean they don't need a trellis to kind of climb, All
right, to start wrapping things up as we're at the tail end, I want each of you take like a minute, like 30 seconds to a minute, to give me like your personal take on where you want to see like the DAO, a year or 2 years from now. Not a very long-term vision thing, but what's the role of the DAO like 2 years from now? Where do you want to see it? Not where it's going to be necessarily, but where do you think it should be?
I'd like to see the DAO have hundreds of millions of dollars in stables and ETH in the treasury. I'd like to see businesses fully owned by the DAO that are doing negotiations on behalf of the DAO. So instead of a service provider or a VC fund coming to the DAO for funding, they go to the DAO-owned entity so that there's a point of centralization, but mostly for the value that comes with negotiations. I'd like to see a delegate base that is diverse in thought and diverse in location, and that is overall has a lot of sophistication, which today we have, but there's still quite a few people who would be interested in participating but don't because of regulatory concerns or whatever it might be. But I'd love to see those people get involved in the DAO. I'd love to see diversified revenue streams. So instead of just sequencer revenue, we have money coming in from lots of different places. But overall, like that's my vision for the DAO, and I bet that it's different than everyone else's up here, which is the key thing that we need to figure out in Arbitrum to become a great DAO for the long term.
I would say double down. I actually think that your vision is actually everyone's going to agree with it. So I just completely disagree with you. Everyone's going to agree with you, and maybe I would just add on we have a bit of a power law issue, I think, in the governance structure. There's, like you said earlier, 15 delegates have so much power, and I'm one of them somehow. I don't know why, but I am, and I would like to see us make within the next year or two, make kind of a self-sacrificing thing from the top delegates to reduce the power law dynamics so that it's not just the top 15 deciding everything.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Matt said, like a sustainable treasury that's growing with multiple revenue streams, which would allow us to continue being very aggressive with acquiring users and growing the ecosystem. So a sustainable treasury that could sustain that and keep Arbitrum growing forever.
I see the DAO as managing one of the most important technology stacks and infrastructure in the world, and being organized in such a way, like Matt said, where it can bring in new stakeholders over time. So, if Amazon wants to become a major contributor to Arbitrum and build something on top of it, they trust the DAO to be credibly neutral, and they have a path to gaining like an appropriate level of influence relative to their investment. And then then there will be 10 Amazons and major companies, nonprofits, governments, other blockchain projects that are built on top of and heavily invested in Arbitrum.
All right, thank you very much for that. Let's hope, I agree with you. Let's hope we can get there, and better yet, let's work towards getting there. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, guys. Thank you, Griff. Thank you, Matthew. And thanks, Frisson. Give a round of applause for these guys.
Huge round of applause.
Thank you very much.